Dear students, hello, I'm Linas Koyala, and I'll be teaching the course Russia, EU, and Change of Global Politics at Vilnius University this fall semester. It's a great pleasure for me to meet you, albeit indirectly as of yet, in this pre-recorded session on the key requirements on the course and the expectations for you with regards to the coming months. So I'll now be presenting basically two core aspects related to this course. The first one being the syllabus, which you can now access on Google Docs, and the link is provided on Vilnius University Virtual Study Environment. And the second part will consist of my presentation on the requirements for op-eds and group presentations. So these are the two assignments that you will have to undertake later in the course. And I will be making a presentation on what are the key requirements for both of these. So I'll now turn on a syllabus so we can go through it. And it begins with short bio of mine. So I'm Linas Koyala, I mentioned that. I'm a director of a think tank based in Vilnius, Lithuania called Eastern Europe Study Center. So we work on many issues related to international affairs and security, especially on the eastern part of Europe, but beyond that as well. I also teach at Vilnius University, and I'm also an associate at the negotiation task force at Davis Center at Harvard University, where I spent a year as a Fulbright scholar. I comment quite a lot on international affairs, and that's one of the reasons why I'm asking you later a bit to write an op-ed in this course, because that's a part of my daily routine, basically. My background educationally, it comes from this university, this particular university. I've studied bachelor and master's at Vilnius University. I've also studied global business at Oxford University, and I'm also a student. At this moment of time, I'm currently enrolled in Executive Master of Business Administration at the University of Cambridge. So I'll now move on to the core parts of the syllabus. As I mentioned, the course is called Russia, the EU, and the Change of Global Politics. It will take place on Thursdays from 4:45 to 6:15 p.m. The room number is 305. I expect most of the classes to take place live, but there might be some slight changes of which you will be informed in advance, as some classes might take place online. And hopefully, certainly there is no quarantine as the weather gets colder later on. So the emphasis of this course is, as the title suggests, on EU and Russia relations, but also on its impact on global trends and tendencies. So we will be touching upon how Russian-EU relations developed over time, but I have to admit that a lot of focus these days will be on Russia's war on Ukraine, Russia's aggressive behavior, and the explanations for that and implications of it as well. So especially in the first part of the course, this is going to be taking a majority of our time. But we'll also look at how Russia's political system functions and how Russia's foreign policies being formed, and of course, some of the global aspects related to this. The great breakdown is the following: 20% it comes from your participation. So I hope that you will be active in discussions, you'll be asking questions, you'll be making remarks, you'll be sharing your thoughts and insights. 30% comes from an op-ed that you will have to write and send to me on this a bit later. And half of your grade comes from the group presentations. So this is essential. Again, I'll be speaking on that a bit later. So the assignments and each seminar will begin with a short discussion an informal one. We'll just begin with some news, some recent developments, which you will be presenting voluntarily. So maybe you've read some piece, maybe you've took a note of an event happening, a political meeting, a battle, unfortunately, another list of sanctions being imposed on Russia, or maybe some political trends beyond Russia's war in Ukraine that could be of interest for our cohort. And then you will be presenting it to all of us just briefly in 1 or 2 minutes and making your own interpretation out of it. So I really expect you not to be stating the facts. That's important, of course, at the beginning, but also sharing your insights and interpretations of the things that are you presenting as news. So you may use any sources and materials you deem necessary. Some of the more popular ones are given here, but you can also read think tank policy papers, commentaries coming from various experts, and again, don't hesitate to touch upon issues which might be not visible for others. Some of the course lectures, or rather seminars, will have guest speakers. You will be informed in advance about this. It's expected that each of the guest speakers will be making some initial presentations on the topic, 10, 15 to 20 minutes, and the remaining time, so an hour or so, will be dedicated to a discussion. So I hope that you will be active participants of this as well, asking questions, making your remarks, of course, depending on a particular topic of that day. Op-eds, you will be submitting an article related to EU-Russia relations. So you have a lot of room to choose from, a lot of room for maneuver. The topic is your own choice. So please don't hesitate to think about it from your own perspective. You don't need to consult me, even though if you want, of course, you can always send me an email and I'll be happily advising you on your topic. But otherwise, just make sure it's related to the course, it's related to the material that we've used, at least to some extent. And then the final decision on the topic is certainly yours. The submission deadline is December 15th, but you are encouraged to send your op-eds earlier if you want. So for that, use this particular email provided here rather than my university email, which is on the top of the syllabus. So again, this is the final deadline, but you are welcome to send your op-ed submissions earlier. And I will be making remarks to your op-eds later in the course. Students will be divided also into groups. So I expect there to be 5 groups according to the current list of students. And those groups are already listed at the bottom of the syllabus. We'll reach that very soon. So you will be making presentations in the latter part of the course. And these groups will not be changed unless there are some changes with regards to the students participating in this course. But in that case, again, you will be informed separately. So groups are listed on the bottom of the syllabus. That list will remain throughout the course, so we can always check it out. And I've also added emails of each of group members, the university email, so that you can reach one another and find ways of connecting. So just briefly on the scheduling and on the topics. So this is the initial class, a pre-recorded session. And you can see some articles given to you to read about op-eds. So this is for you in preparation for your op-eds. Next week, September 22nd, we'll have a guest speaker talking about whether Russia is a part of Europe. So looking at whether Russia perceives itself European, whether Europeans perceive Russia as being also a part of continent, politically, mentally, socially, economically, and otherwise. So this is going to be partly a philosophical discussion, which should give us some ground for further future discussions. And we'll jump on to Russia's war on Ukraine just the next week, September 29th, discussing various aspects related to Russia's motivation to launch a full-fledged attack. And for that, I've already sent you late August 3 lectures series by Sergei Plokhy, a professor at Harvard University. These are really essential ones, and I really hope that you will find some time to watch them through. This explains a lot. It explains a lot about Ukraine, about its history, about Russia's perception of Ukraine, and also of, obviously, today's tragic situation. We will focus during the seminar on this particular article by Vladimir Putin, which was published prior to the full-fledged invasion. And in it, he basically gives his thoughts and prepares ground for the upcoming, from that point of view, attack on Ukraine. And finally, Putin's speech announcing war on Ukraine, which was broadcasted on February 24th, 2022. So we will be discussing this war part. And the next week, again, hopefully a guest speaker will be coming to help us out in explaining how the attack unfolded in the first months and why Russia failed in its strategic goals. They've seemingly expected to, Ukrainian government to collapse in 3 or 4 days. That didn't happen. And why there was such a huge miscalculation, and why and how Ukrainians managed to defend Kyiv, and how the intelligence agencies of the West followed the information about the upcoming attack and when it unfolded. That's the focus of this seminar. And again, hopefully a guest speaker will be joining us to help us out. There's no class on October 13th, and we will be starting then a major part of this course, which is group presentations. So again, groups are already listed, but on this syllabus, you can see which groups are making their presentations when. So group 1 will be making their presentation late October, and each groups are given one book to read, a book that should be basis of your presentation, even though it's not necessarily the only source that you might use in your presentation. So you are welcome to add additional necessary information, but the book shall provide you the basics for the seminar. Again, on this particularities of your presentations a bit later, but in every case, that's the same trend we will follow. The second group will have their own book to read and to present, third their own, and the fourth and the fifth the same. So the topics are obviously different. We'll start off with the basics of the Kremlin's regime and personalization of it. We'll then move to the idea of Russia's nationalism. We'll have then Putinomics, basically economic aspects and some energy aspects related to Russia's development in recent years. Russia-China relations, obviously a very important part of the latter years and the coming years as well. And finally, Russia in the new global order. That's going to be obviously also an important and interesting discussion. I imagine that not all of the students will be able to read all of the books given. So of course, it's necessary for the members of the group to have read the book needed for their presentation. And hopefully, at least some of you will be able to, read at least parts of other books as well. The access to each of these books is provided by Vilnius University, so you can do that freely. But again, it's not mandatory to read each of these books, even though they are all worthy of your time. So please, if you can, at least parts of other books are also good for your knowledge and understanding of the topics. And finally, we will end the course with some additional talks on Russia and Belarus, as well as EU, Russia, Moldova, and Georgia. But on this, again, a bit later. So these are the groups that I've mentioned, 5 groups with 4 members each. Emails are provided, and there might be, again, some additions to the groups, but they're going to be more or less the same. I will evaluate groups as a whole. So basically, it's not necessary for me to see each member of the group speaking when the presentation is being done by the group. There could be 1 designated speaker, there could be 2, or however you decide to make your own presentations. But unless you inform me otherwise, I will think that each of the group member contributed to the presentation equally, and they are then evaluated equally. Again, just repeating myself, please use this link to the syllabus throughout the course, as there might be some slight changes of which I will also inform you via email. So that's the syllabus. I'll now move to another part of my presentation, which is on op-eds and group presentations, the requirements and some key aspects of it. So, tips on writing an op-ed. First of all, what's an op-ed and how long should it be? So an op-ed is an article, surprisingly, which is called from its position in a newspaper, a traditional position of an opinion article, which goes opposite the editorial page. And in the end, the expectation out of it is to have 2 things. First, your own opinion on the topic, because an op-ed must include your own views, your subjective views, your personal views, but also be based on factual analysis, and not necessarily academic analysis, because that's certainly not a thesis, it's not a scientific work, but it has to be based on facts, knowledge, and information which supports your own argument and shows why the other side, if you are in a dispute, is not right. Sorry, I haven't touched upon an important aspect related to that. So how long the op-ed should be? Well, there is no rule, of course, but I would expect an op-ed of yours to be something between 650 words to 850 words. So it's not a long text. 650 to 850, that's a regular op-ed. It could be 500 words and a very good op-ed. It could be 1,000 words, another great op-ed. But I would suggest and encourage you to try to aim for 650 to 850, because that's enough space for you to fill with your knowledge and expertise. A lengthy op-ed might become boring. A very short op-ed may be a bit shallow. So 650, 850 is what you should aim for, not exceeding too much and not going below much as well. Some questions that you should answer yourselves while choosing a topic. Again, as I've mentioned, the topic for an op-ed is your own choice, your personal choice, which has to be linked to the course material and the course topics. But in the end, you decide on which particular aspect shall be discussed, because you will certainly not be able to analyze, Russia's war in Ukraine from A to Z in an op-ed. That's impossible, because an op-ed is a very short piece of text, but you can touch upon different concrete aspects of the topic. And again, that's your own decision. But you should be able to answer these 2 fundamental questions, why you and why now. So why you means why you are the author of this particular text. Of course, you may argue that you are required to write an op-ed for the course that you take at Vilnius University. And that's, well, fine. But that's not enough. Probably I would hope that you have some links to the topic which prove your knowledge, your interest in it, and shows how topic is close to your heart. For instance, if you write on the impact of sanctions on Russia, you might be a student who wrote some research papers on this topic, some years ago. So basically, you are an expert of the topic. You might work in a bank and you know the analysis of your bank or of other banks in this regard. You might have participated in some conferences or events which discussed this particular topic, and you found some of the insights that you've heard there interesting and important to share with a wider audience. So there could be multiple ways of linking you to the topic, some, academic ones, some personal ones, but I would really, really suggest you to answer this question to yourselves while choosing a topic, because that will make your article more personal. And it's needed for an op-ed article to be linked to the author. It shouldn't be just analysis of whatever, because there is a deadline for you to fulfill. The second, a very much related question is why now? So an op-ed usually is being published at a newspaper or a news website, and it covers some of the things that are essential for today. So for instance, writing about some historic aspect of Russia might be interesting, but not necessarily responding to the question why now correctly. Because if you look back at how Russia was an empire in 19th century, for instance, that's good, but you have to find a link to something that happens today. And the link seems to be quite obvious with regards to Russia's foreign policy and aggression vis-a-vis Ukraine, but still you have to prove how your talk on 19th century in your op-ed links to some of the things that have an impact today. So this should be also a part of your thinking. Of course, you don't have to be, hot with your topic in a sense that you discuss something that happened 2 days ago and then you submit an op-ed just, again, 24 more hours later. That's not expected out of you, but again, especially if you touch on some historic aspects or some aspects that are not covered by the news media internationally, then you should really prove why this idea of yours is of interest, particularly today or again in recent weeks. Also, know the audience and catch its attention. Op-eds are usually read by a wide audience. So it's not only experts of international affairs, it's not only politicians who work with these topics, it's not only journalists who cover the issues that read op-eds. Now, your reader might be, in theory, of course, a doctor, an engineer, an artist. So basically a very smart person, but not necessarily the one who knows all the details about how NATO or the European Union functions. And he or she might not be familiar with some of the terms used or jargon used by experts of that particular field of international affairs or criminology or foreign policy. So you should aim to be understandable for a smart person who is not necessarily an expert of that field, because you aim your article to be read by a rather broad international audience. So imagine as if you are sending your op-ed to one of the major news media outlets, which again has a wide audience coming from different fields of expertise and different even regions of the world. Be bold at the beginning. These are some examples. I will not read them out. You can just look at them. But usually an op-ed starts with a strong statement or a clear indication of where you're heading with your text. So please don't hesitate to be sharp and bold at the beginning and avoid being overly general and stating the obvious, because that's not how op-eds catch attention. And your aim again is to be interesting for the reader. And if the reader opens your article and sees that the first 2 or 3 paragraphs sound boring, then it's likely your latter part of the text will not be read at all. So an op-ed has to be readable and has to be interesting and has to catch the attention. For that, you also need a headline. Don't forget that. It's not only the text that matters, but also a headline. It has to be catchy. Again, it's very much linked to the first two paragraphs of the text. And please don't hesitate to be seeking some click bites. Of course, not exaggerating, not being overly enthusiastic and overly emotional about the topic that you're presenting, but really, really think about a headline. And it does not necessarily come out easily when you write an article. You might leave it for some time, the text itself, to think about a headline. So don't hesitate to spend some time with it. But in the end, find the best way of presenting the core argument with a strong and attractive headline as well. Also, I recommend you to think about some anecdotes or short stories that could support your thesis. Those anecdotes or short stories might be related to your own experiences. For instance, maybe you went to Russia some years ago, or maybe you went to a Western capital where you've overheard a conversation on Russia, or maybe you've been in a bar with your friends talking about, Russian foreign policy or Putin or Putin's invasion on Ukraine, and some interesting insights came out of that conversation. Don't hesitate to write a paragraph about your meeting in a bar and a discussion that took place, and then expand an argument out of this particular small story, because this is an op-ed. Again, this is not a scientific paper, and anecdotes usually brighten up the mood, and they show that you are, again, personally engaged with the topic, and it's additional flavor to an informative text in the end. Of course, don't lie. Of course, don't make up the stories, but think about the real ones that could really add up to your texts and information. Express your own views. Again, an opinion article requires your own opinion, and I would suggest you not to use this "in my opinion" at the start of the sentence to say that you've provided your own opinion, because sometimes starting a sentence with your "in my opinion" does not mean that the following words are really your own views. So you should prove yourself capable of expressing your perception in the article throughout the text, not leaving it to the end, or not necessarily putting everything at the beginning of the title, just giving an impression to the reader of how you perceive the topic you discuss. So don't forget that. It shouldn't be a summary of other smart commentaries. It shouldn't be a summary of some factual information. It's not a report. It's not a thing that you give to a decision maker as a memo before he or she prepares to make an important speech. It's your own views that matter, and you should find a way of presenting that as well. Also, if you discuss something, so you have some counter arguments coming from the other side, from other authors of op-eds, or from other academics, or from some decision makers, then you should also present the other side's views as well. At least find a way of presenting them and showing why your own views are better, or why they are more fact-based, or why they are more relevant in today's circumstances. So you shouldn't leave the other side's arguments aside, especially if you have a very strong argument of your own to make. Be careful with numbers. Of course, stats are important, and you should add some statistical figures, some data to strengthen your argument and to, again, prove your thesis, but don't overdo it. Don't put too much stats. Don't put too many numbers, because that makes it complicated reading. And sometimes you can use different ways of presenting the same numbers. So, for instance, you could say that analogies work. 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. So you could play different categories of the same numbers in order to make it more, again, readable and different from just putting some blunt statistics in. But again, please limit the facts and figures and data points that you put in an article, because if it's full of different numbers, then it becomes again a report which is highly complicated for majority of possible leaders. No jargon, I've mentioned that already. Steer clear of wonky technical language because your audience are not necessarily familiar with it. And no cliches. Again, that's very much related to the aspect that I mentioned with a strong beginning, which is needed for an op-ed article. So you shouldn't start your op-ed by saying NATO is at the crossroads, or I will now discuss the future of transatlantic relations, or the West relationship with Russia is complex and complicated, and or Donald Trump made a controversial statement. These are, kind of Captain Obvious type of sentences which do not give any information whatsoever to a reader. And especially the first sentences tend to be problematic in this regard. So if you wrote something similar to this, please delete it and start off with something very different. And think about it throughout, because 650 words or 850 words are not that much. So you should really aim for the boldest and the most important words only, and avoid these kinds of statements. Details, some details that matter also. Overly long paragraphs are not what an op-ed should look like. So basically, you should divide your op-ed into multiple paragraphs consisting of 3, 4, maybe 5 sentences, depending on how long they are, and avoid lengthy sentences as well. They shouldn't be too complicated, again, to read, and divide your text into paragraphs. The number of words I've mentioned, it shouldn't be too short, it shouldn't be too long. You should aim from 6 to 650 and maybe 850 at most. So that's the op-ed. I mentioned mid-December is the deadline for submissions, but you are able to do that earlier if you want as well. And I'll now move to the presentations part. So as mentioned, you are divided into 5 groups. Each of the groups have to make a presentation, and that presentation should take into account the following requirements. Timing is essential. So you are given 45 minutes for your presentation. It could be a bit longer. It shouldn't be shorter, the presentation itself, but also think about it as a chance for your group to lead a seminar rather than to make a presentation. So you step up into the shoes of a university lecturer or a teacher, and having a topic in your mind, you have to explain it to a wider audience, and you might have multiple ways of doing it. So you read a book, you know the topic well, and you think about the audience which doesn't know that topic that well and is keen to listen to your argument, and in what way you make it and how you present it and what you ask of the audience in terms of its participation, because it's a seminar, it's not a lecture. That's your own choice. So try to be interactive. For instance, you could divide the groups. Again, the audience divided into maybe 4 groups to discuss 4 different questions, and maybe even make a very, very short 2 to 3 minutes presentation. Maybe you have a quiz, even with small prizes, to help the audience better grasp the topic. Maybe you ask for a debate. The audience has to be actively involved in your presentation, or rather, again, the seminar that you lead, by debating some of the questions that you pose to them. So it's up to you to decide. There are multiple ways of doing it. There is no one way of doing it, but I hope that it's not a lecture of just you standing up and reading for 45 minutes and then saying, thank you very much. That's not how it should be done. And again, you have 45 minutes, you can extend a bit longer, but the aim is in the end to really present some of the key features of what you've read, but also involve the audience. Think about broad versus deep. The book that you've read, the book that you will have read, is both broad and deep, and you will not be able to present everything that you've read. So you have to be selective with your material. You have to really discuss in your group what's the most important thing that we want to present, what's the most important message that we want to send, and what's the focus of our talk. So it's not like I expect you to go from page number 1 in your book to page number 200 and touching upon every aspect along the way. No, that's not how it should be done. You have to be selective, and that's your own choice. Don't hesitate to skip parts of the book that you deem irrelevant to you and to the group or to the circumstances of the day. That's your own choice, and you might be very successful in focusing on just some parts of the book. But of course, please read everything so that you can make a choice out of a couple of options. Make an introduction and summary. So an introduction shall reveal all of us, those who will be listening to your presentation, what to expect out of it and how the talk will unfold. So maybe there will be an interactive part later on, or maybe we'll start off with an interactive part and then have some kind of presentation, or maybe there's going to be a video that we will watch. Whatever, that's your own choice and your own decision, but you have to inform the audience as much as you can in advance to form the expectations, and also put up a summary at the end. So key things that we've learned over the last 45 minutes or 60 minutes of your talk that shall remain for the audience after the seminar ends. So some key takeaways, 3, mostly 5, shall be in place. Concentrate on your core message that's related to key takeaways. So you have to have some things that you really, really want others to remember. So that's your core message or a couple of messages. So concentrate on that and avoid details which are not relevant. Add stories or anecdotes. So similarly to op-eds, it's sometimes more useful to talk about meetings that took place or some stories that go alongside crucial decisions made by decision makers. So you can add that flavor to presentations as well. And you can also use this 15, 30, 45 rule. So your presentation, if you have one, it's not mandatory to have a PowerPoint presentation, but it might be useful to show some pieces of information such as maps or something similar, as well as listing key takeaways. So, but there shouldn't be a lot of slides because timing is strict. So maybe up to 15 slides is a good way of thinking about it. Use a font size no less than 30 because sometimes you add up too much information into one slide and it's really, really, really difficult even to read it from a distance. So you should really use a rather big font in order to limit, first of all, yourselves, how much you can add to each of the slides. And again, last no more than 45 minutes. I'm eager to accept a 15-minute plus to this, so up to 60 minutes, because you have a rather lengthy book to present each of the groups. But please also think about the time. You shouldn't be spending more than that with your talk, including everything, which means technicalities. A USB port might not work. There might be a problem with your internet and access to your emails where you've put up your slides. There might be a sound issue if you want to show a video. So for that, you have to prepare. And I would encourage you to come a bit earlier with your presentation and just make sure that everything works accordingly, and then you will have more time for your presentations. Please take this into account. For real, in most of the cases, we have groups. I, as a teacher, have groups who really spend 10 minutes preparing their presentation and lose essential time, which could be used for their informative talk. And that's it. That's what I expect out of you, and I'm sure you will be succeeding with your presentations, with your fantastic op-eds, with your insights throughout the course. And please don't hesitate to get in touch with me again, throughout the course via email. The university email is provided on the top of the syllabus, and I will try to answer as soon as possible. Again, just repeating myself, follow the syllabus. It might be updated. Follow the emails. I'll be sending you some information via emails throughout the course, especially the essential one related to any changes to the scheduling or room numbers or something similar. And otherwise, the material will be added to the virtual environment of Vilnius University, to which all of you should have an access to. If you have any trouble with technical issues, please contact the administration of the institute, which will be happily providing you assistance. If that's related to course, materials, and etc., then of course get in touch with me. So hopefully this was informative and clear for you. If you have any questions related to my presentation, again, don't hesitate to ask. Send it to me via email, and I will share some of the questions if you ask them with your peers as well. And otherwise, hopefully seeing you next week, September 22nd, and having the first talk on Russia, EU, and global affairs. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.